The year is 1990. We walk down the empty lines of an old amusement park. A place that should be filled to max capacity with smiling children and happy families. The smell of overpriced processed foods and sugary drinks fill the air as we hear the screams of joyous fear from the other patrons who are having the time of their lives on a rickety roller coaster. Excitement should be overwhelming in our chests as we make it ever closer. Though today, or tonight rather, is a little different. All that fills us is a mixture of dread and determination as we make our way to the eerie abandoned and rusty husk of what once was a beacon of happiness. The smell of blood and rot fills our lungs as we march ever closer. And once we make it inside, it dawns on us. Nothing is how it should be. Survival horror is a genre that exists in an odd place. It's both an ever-popular and beloved style of game, holding some of the best stories and experiences that can be found in gaming as a whole. Resident Evil has long been a series that has stood as a pinnacle of horror, not only being one of the first horror franchises to make waves in gaming, but set a standard and precedent that would creep its way into countless titles to come. The blueprint for what Silent Hill would build its own legacy of emotional, psychological horror on, and in its own right become a juggernaut of survival horror, with Silent Hill 2 often being regarded as one of the greatest games of all time. And that's without mentioning other classic series such as Fatal Frame or Obscure. Resident Evil took the idea of a cheesy yet gory B-movie and placed it into an entirely new breed of game, where slow-paced gameplay that prioritized putting the player into stressful situations where their choices really mattered. Each bullet counted, and each puzzle that on its surface wasn't too hard to figure out, but was still disorienting, especially in a haze of fixed camera angles, horrifying creatures, and the fact that you knew with each room came a chance to not just death, but a new mountain to climb. You never knew if you were truly prepared for what came next, if using your limited amount of saves to move forward was worth it or not, or if you might have just screwed yourself by using one too many bullets on the zombie that you panic killed when it took you off guard. And this is without even talking about the absolute genius of the game's environment. The Spencer Mansion was a perfectly creepy and atmospheric place to get lost in. Each new wing would bring more dread and horror than the last, and the more you explored, the more that the place shifted from just a piece of classic Gothic architecture to a science fiction nightmare, with mad scientist labs and monsters that break far past the realm of zombies and giant spiders, and into the realm of body horror biomonsters. As I said, plenty of series would take these building blocks and create their own unique experiences from them, some being extremely similar in nature, and others being far removed visually with RE's DNA and just being held at their core. In the decades since survival horror really got its footing, I can name many great games that evolved off its mutated DNA. Dino Crisis, Siren, Silent Hill, Illbleed, Signalis, Obscure, Blue Stinger, Rule of Rose, Vampire Hunter D, Fatal Frame, Parasite Eve, Kuwan, Hollow Body. Look, these are just some of the more obvious ones. And that's not even including series that share branches from the same tree, but are much further removed, such as Corpse Party. What I'm trying to get at here is that survival horror and its own subgenres were a rich, popular, and celebrated corner of gaming, though something interesting happened come the 7th gen. In the era of the PS360, survival horror seemed to really die off. Only a handful of straight-up horror games would see public acclaim like Dead Space, and horror experiences fell more in line with dark and creepy action games like Condemned or Fear. And this void would only continue to grow as horror gaming more or less fell off outside of the indie space. We would occasionally get a game like Soma or Alien Isolation, but as good as those two games are, they're still far away from the classic survival horror formula that made it a staple. But during this period of relative death, we would start to see a growing pit of nostalgia build around the entire idea of survival horror. New generations would start going back and experiencing these classic titles, and companies would begin to show newfound interests of support, remaking classics such as Resident Evil. And from here, it was really only a matter of time before something truly special would come to be. And that magnum opus of nostalgia would be none other than a small little indie title known as Crow Country. Crow Country is an indie survival horror game that serves as an absolute love letter to the survival horror genre. Not only recreating the classic formulas of the past, but paying homage to many different games that would serve as its inspiration, all while modernizing some of the more obtuse and dated elements without sacrificing what made the past so great. It's a short but powerful experience that holds monsters, mystery, thick atmosphere, and the all too familiar twists and tropes that make any great survival horror game. Crow Country takes its approach to both gameplay and story from the classic era of the genre, creating a deep contrast with most of what comes out today. Many games that take on horror themes these days are veiled in a much more cinematic and larger scale approach to their stories and overall gameplay. The Last of Us or Dead Space, for example, where the events and tales that they tell are world-shattering and have much larger scale effects on their retrospective universes. Many of the classics, however, like Fatal Frame, Silent Hill, and even Clock Tower, tell tales that are very self-contained and isolated, holding situations and events that should be earth-shattering, but due to their confined and contained nature, feel much more intimate, as outside of a handful of characters who will survive them, the monsters, story events, and implications as a whole never really leave the bubble that they exist in. No one would know or believe the wild and insane story that would be told, sounding much more like a made-up tale meant to scare whoever hears it. And this is the same way that Crow Country approaches its own story, with an earth-shattering implication, but wrapped in the intimate setting of a rundown, abandoned theme park, and a collection of characters who, outside of a couple famous faces, are relative nobodies. And if they disappeared, they not only wouldn't be missed, they probably wouldn't even be noticed. This classic approach to survival horror storytelling drastically impacts the atmosphere, because the intimate setting with little to no others around to experience it plays directly into the sense of loneliness that we feel as a player, where anytime we see something slightly humanoid, it's dread-inducing, as whatever slight hope that we have that it might be a friend is almost always outweighed by the fear of it being yet another monster out to get us, and in turn making it even more nerve-wracking when we do meet somebody who appears friendly, because we have no idea what their intentions are or why they're in the same predicament we are. In a way, it's very similar to the Silent Hill games, where in almost every single one, anytime we come across another human character, It's always a coin toss whether they're going to be actually human or if they are somebody that is truly our friend in the situation or somebody with much darker and ominous intentions.
Heather. That's what you're called now, isn't it?
And who are you?
The name's Vincent. Don't forget it, okay? I'm on your side.
The game starts us off with a fittingly PS1 style intro, where we see our heroine, Mara, make her way into the abandoned theme park, to be met with a ghost town, instantly gripping us with a hook. Dead animals lay across the ground with fresh blood. A distinctly chemical-laced fog is in the air, obscuring our vision and setting a mood of oncoming dread. As we walk just a little bit more in, we see suspicious remnants of trash with numbers, as if we've been given a trail of breadcrumbs to follow. As we continue to look around, we see bear traps, indicating that there are threats amongst us. And one far more dangerous than what was previously implied with a dead crow. And as we walk further in, and we meet our first NPC, it all becomes much more real. He's hunched over, injured, frantically talking about being attacked by monsters, as he simply tried to get proof of their existence. And it's after this conversation that we finally meet some of these monsters that we've heard of. Zombies. It's the classic survival horror formula. Give us little to no information, throw us into a haunting and creepy environment, give us a gripping and chilling implication, then reveal the first of many threats. And just like Resident Evil, don't let these shambling corpses fool you. They're just the surface of the threats that we'll be facing in the coming hours. After putting them down, Mara takes her newfound companion, Arthur, back to her car to let him rest and be safe as she explores the theme park further. And as we do that, we get a further implication. Mara knows more than she's letting on. She came prepared to fight and has a clear goal: find Edward Crow. Now, one of the most defining aspects of Crow Country is its art style, with creators attributing its character models to being deeply inspired by the likes of Final Fantasy VII and its goofy as shit 3D sprites. Though it doesn't just do the old school low poly look that you would expect from a project like this. Rather, it actually fuses this whole low poly aesthetic with character designs that are far more in line with children's toys. The more we discover the rides and meet these different monsters, the more that everything kind of looks toy and almost Lego-like, while the human characters have a weird resemblance to wooden dolls. And strangely enough, it actually fits perfectly into the atmosphere of the game's setting. We're playing in an old abandoned theme park, a children's paradise of fun and wonder, if you will. But it's now abandoned and warped into an uncanny nightmare. So the characters looking like old children's toys from an era long past only furthers that same theme. Old toys from the mid-20th century often fell into the uncanny valley. Porcelain dolls in particular are almost always seen as these creepy, disgusting, freaky little monsters, but if you look back at them, in their day, they were normal, everyday items. And even a lot of toys from the 50s and 60s hold features that are just downright creepy by today's standards, existing in this odd in-between of scary and cute. Wooden dolls are no different than this. They might be a little less visually appealing. They do hold a sense of uncanniness that often comes with old toys. and their unnatural looking limbs and overly fake look. And when rendered into this low poly art style, they really pop, adding a subtle and even overlooked sense of eeriness that's more so felt subconsciously than outwardly noticed. Whether it's intentional or not, it's just an interesting part of the art style that I noticed, and in many ways it resembles the art style used by an even older series than even Resident Evil. And that would be Alone in the Dark. If Resident Evil is your dad's survival horror game, then Alone in the Dark is your grandpa's survival horror game. Coming out on the ancient operating system known as Microsoft DOS, Alone in the Dark's art style has a similar toy-like quality to it like Crow Country and Final Fantasy VII, where the mansion you explore looks less like a realized take on a big spooky estate like R.E.'s Spencer Mansion, and looks much more like an old dollhouse, with its characters also having a resemblance to wooden dolls just like Crow Country. Though this probably has a lot less to do with art direction, and more so with the primitive technology it was all running on. Though during its time, Alone in the Dark was a bit of a visual marvel, as most games in 1992 still looked like this. So, we may scoff at it now, but back in the day, it was actually groundbreaking. But in today's world, it's still goofy and uncanny, with the main character looking like an extra from Moral Oral. Though the art style choice isn't the only similarity it has to Crow Country, and later survival horror overall, as Alone in the Dark was one of the first games to ape at the cosmic horror well of H.P. Lovecraft. Often overshadowed by his own mythos and its iconography, H.P. Lovecraft was a master of horror in his day, taking the entire medium into a new direction defined less by the horror of a known danger and more by the danger of what we don't understand. While Howard himself wasn't the first to portray beings beyond our comprehension, or even play with themes such as insanity or mental unreliability, he was the first to do it on the level that he did, eschewing the fears of the things that go bump in the night, that want to simply eat, kill, or torture us, and replacing them with beings who see us as nothing but ants and worms at their feet. Beings who may be gods, or just creatures far beyond humanity. And the reader never really being able to truly understand which one they were, let alone anything really about them. Cosmic horror often gets lost in translation outside of its own mediums, though, especially outside of Lovecraft's own work. And that's because he created his own mythos where the characters within it won't really work the same outside of their confines. It's hard to make a game or a movie including beings incomprehensible to the human mind when we're tasked to kill them on a regular basis. And if you pull back the curtain too much, the fear of the unknown really begins to disappear. Because if we have an understanding of it, it's not so unknown anymore, is it? This is why works that take inspiration from Lovecraft's work, but meld his elements and staples into their own thing, tend to work much more successfully. Stephen King himself is actually one of the best versions of this that you can find in the literary world. His works like It and The Mist do this perfectly. With It, the antagonist is the ancient shape-shifting creature whose powers and motivations remain ever-changing and obscure throughout most of the story. It allows the ambiguity of Pennywise to create tension on a constant basis, as he can be anywhere at any time, and whether he's just there to observe or he's here to attack almost always remains unknown until he makes his strike. Trying to understand the depths of his abilities also becomes near impossible, as in the beginning, all we know is that he's a killer clown who doesn't age, and by the end, we find that he can manipulate people's minds, shapeshift, cause hallucinations, and all sorts of other malicious things. In many ways, he's similar to the old god Nyarlathotep. Now, King's other story that I mentioned, The Mist, is a little bit different. Here, we have one of the direct inspirations to Silent Hill, where these alien creatures that closely resemble many earthly bugs, though warped and massive, begin to terrorize and destroy a small town in the cover of immensely thick fog. Again, allowing the unknown and uncanny to terrorize the reader and leaving our characters in a near constant guessing game, as they never really know what is actually happening or just what these creatures really are. Something Silent Hill took and fused with the more traditional Lovecraftian element of cults, worshipping vaguely evil, ever-powerful beings that can distort reality, and are really ever-changing on top of that, as in each game, as we progress, the creatures we encounter become more and more twisted, and their behaviors and abilities become ever more unpredictable. Crow Country uses the same approach with its own enemies, with them starting off relatively humanoid and, well, pulling a very similar trick to Resident Evil, where they start off as that extremely familiar shambling corpse, a zombie, there to lull you into a false sense of familiarity, only to continually rip it away as everything progresses. The more we move forward in the game, the more the creatures that we encounter become distorted and otherworldly. Initially, we see some more fleshy masses here and there, and eventually we come across some more beefy behemoth type creatures that are still humanoid. But where things really start to get kind of fucked is when we start seeing the more abstract and bizarre monsters. And this is also where that H.P. Lovecraft influence really comes in. Mara will encounter these slug tentacle spike creatures that, outside of that word vomit of a description, are essentially impossible to define. She will also come face to face with even more warped humanoids that look like gray aliens that were made out of raw meat. And even these eerie looking and kind of goofy skeleton monsters. It's, again, kind of funny to say it out loud because the descriptors I'm using are kind of silly, but how would you describe them? When you talk about a creature like Cthulhu, for example, what is he? He's a giant buff man with an octopus for a head that has giant wings for some reason and sleeps in the ocean. But when you see illustrations, it indicates just how terrifying he actually is. And it's the same thing with a Shoggoth or Dagon, the fish god, or really any other of Lovecraft's monsters. Even a lot of Silent Hill's creatures. And that's exactly what Crow Country is aiming for. It uses that Lovecraftian design of mishmash nonsense. Things that are extremely hard to explain if you're not just showing it to someone. I can easily show you why some of these monsters are creepy and scary looking, but if I tried to describe them, then, well, Mr. Huggy Hands here just sounds like a joke, doesn't he? Something else that's very unique is that each enemy will pose a unique threat in how they need to be tackled and treated. And again, this is where, for the millionth time I'm saying this, that Silent Hill influence comes in, as that series is well known for its enemy variety in both their looks and personalities. Some of the monsters are aggressive and pursue you directly, while others are far more passive and will give you very little trouble as long as you just kind of avoid and run around them. And it's really this enemy variety and ability to handle combat in your own fashion by choosing to either be as aggressive or passive as you see fit, where Crow Country really shines in terms of showing off how it perfected the classic survival horror formula. While there are big elements and influences from all across the 5th and 6th generation of survival horror, it's pretty obvious that Crow Country is heavily focused on emulating Resident Evil. But to call it an RE clone is missing the forest for the trees. Crow Country doesn't really play like a Resident Evil clone so much as it plays and feels the way you remember classic Resident Evil playing. It brings the more smooth and action-focused combat systems of 4 and 5 and puts it into the slower-paced, puzzle-heavy environments of the original trilogy, allowing for the stressful where the fuck do I go next style progression to feel far less frustrating, as combat is now much better, but takes this Silent Hill approach in incorporating passive and aggressive enemies into the mix, letting it feel like we're always in more danger than we really are, making it to where the player is more prone to panic and make bad decisions rather than feel like the game is just straight up unfair. If you're haphazard and careless and you burn through all your resources and find yourself stuck in a corner, that's your fault for being irresponsible and not thinking 2 steps ahead. And that's really the magic of this game and what makes it feel so perfect. Crow Country emulates the classic formula of Resident Evil while implementing all the improvements of its sequels and the innovations from the games that it helped to inspire, all culminating in this gem of an experience. And I think the puzzles show this off best. A lot of early RE puzzles were just more slightly cryptic Doom-style progressions, where the name of the game is finding the right color key to get through the right color door. Just in Resident Evil, you would need to push some stuff around, or maybe solve a simple environmental puzzle. Now, Crow Country, on the other hand, disguises a lot of its progression in the same premise of key hunting, but where it differs is in its obtuse nature. It takes a lot more of these Silent Hill style environmental situations of interacting and searching creepy and obtuse places for items, with some of the Fatal Frame style puzzles where it's more of a brain teaser, where the game demands you to actually think, put together the numbers and the dates or the trivia that you found in the various notes across the park in order to get the correct answer. The infamous mushroom puzzle is a really good example of this. Funnily enough, this same approach is even taken to the game's music as well. Crow Country's OST sounds very RE in terms of its instrumentation and use of cheesy synthesized orchestrations and woodwinds. The whole thing really feels like it nails that PS1 sound, but this time in a more carnival fashion, which fits perfectly with the oh-so-whimsical nature of the theme park. But that's not to say that the soundtrack is just a one-trick pony either. It also brings back that Fatal Frame influence here, where there's some spots where the music sounds like it also belongs to that series. Quiet drone of just everlasting dread. The kind of tension that just feels like it's building and never letting go. A staple of that series and masterfully shown off here. This style of music only shows up a handful of times, but coincidentally, I'm sure, only really in places that are the most paranormal. And once again, to bring up Silent Hill, there's even a specific song in the game that sounds like it's using the exact same sample as White Noise.
Could you really be in this town?
The sheer amount of love and passion for the genre that is felt in every area of the game, from its gameplay, puzzle design, art style, and music, well, it's all just breathtaking. And it really does come across as a love letter to the whole genre. But what really makes Crow Country stand above the rest is that it's a love letter that innovates rather than emulates. And if that wasn't obvious enough from its gameplay and overall presentation, then it's captured perfectly in its story. As we talked about, Crow Country starts off extremely simple. We are Mara Forest, a Fed that's come to a long forgotten and almost completely abandoned theme park, in search of its founder, Edward Crow, all with the intentions of putting a bullet through him. And during the early game, that's about all the concrete information that we have to work with. The rest of it is very ambiguous and obtuse. We get some lore bits that are drip-fed through small conversations, Mara's observations, and notes in newspapers we find along the way. Aside from the obvious signs that an incident caused the closure of the park, all we really know is something is causing monsters to pop up, and it's a secret the owners of the park don't want to get out. Other than that, we're pretty blind, letting the ride of the game tell us its story. And as we interact more with the world, meet more characters, and hear Mara's thoughts on everything, it dawns on us. Mara knows something that we don't, and so does almost every key player that we come across, holding their own secrets. It all makes it seem like there's a lot more meat to this story than the B-movie plot that we've been given. So, why don't we take a step back and take a look at the past? Throughout the genre's history, there have really only been two camps of story styles to survival horror. You have the Clock Towers and the Resident Evils, which have really competent enough but very outwardly goofy B-movie style plots, used less to provoke thought, or meaning, or even depth. They're just there to entertain you and give a reason for all the insanity that we face. Hence why Umbrella Corp constantly has yet another version of a virus ready to give us new flavors of monsters to fight through. Now, on the other hand, we have more serious and psychological stories, ones that are meant to provoke thought, meaning, and depth. The Silent Hills and Parasite Eves of the genre, where each monster, character, and story is meant to serve into a larger narrative, playing out like a puzzle that we put together as we gather more and more information. And just like with its gameplay and its music, Crow Country plays out like a cross between both of these, where on the surface, it lets us enjoy a simple mystery of who and what are these creatures, and where do we find Edward Crow, and as it plays out, it culminates into a cosmic horror tale of man treading into territory he shouldn't. We get little tidbits and hints at things through the phone calls we receive from Crow, as he laments his actions, gives justification, but for the most part, he actually just really laments in a remorseful way the things that have led to the current predicament. And it's through these phone calls that we receive a lot of gaps between all the different things that we're discovering, from the gold to the monsters that are actually referred to in this case as the guests, and even the situation with Elaine. It's actually pretty masterful how these are used, because without making it abundantly clear, they're almost like chapter segments. After we complete a new area, or we get to a new area, or just anything that shows progress to us in the game, we can expect to find a phone call from our good friend Crow, where he will give us answers to questions while posing plenty more with what he says. Now, I don't normally care about spoilers, but here I will say, play the game. Let it take you through its mystery, and enjoy the ride that it gives you. It really is just one of those games that's better to experience firsthand. The tragic nature of its characters and the old school Lovecraftian horror of the guests, it really does feel like it's one of the classics, and one that's well worth your time, especially if you're a fan of the story, the Dunwich Horror. Now, what really makes the story work so well, without spoiling it, is really just how it handles itself. It sticks to that B-movie path of Resident Evil, but uses the Lovecraftian elements of its story to flesh itself out into something a lot more cohesive, with an interesting mystery to really sink your teeth into, but not so much that it takes away from the tongue-in-cheek cheesiness of its initial premise. And the character writing does a lot of the heavy lifting here. Each one of these characters has their own unique personality and quirks, feeling relatable and likable. Mara herself is a fantastic protagonist, and it's all because of her personality. She has this very generally detached and playfully sarcastic nature to her, while also feeling very much like she's competent enough to go on the adventure that she does. Her dialogue and all of her observations are very fun and lighthearted, and when they are more serious, they come across more so inquisitive and determined. She never once comes across like one of these bitchy, I'm a girl boss type characters, and she also never feels like she isn't taking the situation seriously in a way that a lot of these aloof, self-insert types tend to do. And much of this can be said about the other characters as well. It's a stark contrast from the joyless seriousness of a lot of modern gaming, where there's no room for fun or for jokes, unless it's that oh so wacky, nothing is meaningful, let's just joke around approach that other series like Borderlands kind of take. Crow Country maintains a distinct video game feel that has really been lost in a lot of the modern age. It harkens back to when games used to walk a tightrope between their serious and comical elements. Like Leon throwing out a quip like, "Where's everyone going? Bingo?" Right after he just survived a deadly attack from a horde of feral villagers, while still understanding the seriousness of his standing in such a horrific nightmare of a scenario. And Crow Country does this as well, just a bit more restrained. And these quips aren't the only thing that it brings back. Another staple that's kind of been lost to time is the old reward of goofy alternate costumes to wear if you complete the optional challenges or beat the game a number of times. And here we have just that. It's something that used to be very common in this genre that's, again, one of those old video gamey elements that you don't really see of so much anymore. And I think it's all these little harkens back to the past that really sum up what I'm trying to get at. It's in the title of the video, and it's something that I spent the entire runtime really trying to get across. Crow Country is a love letter. It's a statement that classic survival horror never died, and is something that not only can exist in a nostalgic throwback, but also in a forward-thinking way, innovating and further pushing the standards of what can be done with the genre. And this has been my own love letter to one of the best games I've played in a long time. Now, before we go, there's just one more thing that I want to talk about. This is my wall of shame. The list of accomplices complicit with this garbage fire of a channel. They financially reward me for my bad decisions, and hey, if you would like to see more and feel like you want to throw some of your hard-earned money at me, links are in the description. But in all seriousness, I can't thank you all enough for the support. And while I know this video is a bit of a different take than my typical fare, I hope you still enjoyed it. I got a lot of content in the works, and I hope you join me for more. But with all that being said, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.